All right, well, welcome back for more of the coffee talks here at HPE Discover. Really interesting session coming up, I think. Formula E, and we have both the on-track talent and the behind-the-scenes talent with the leading driver with the team, as well as the CTO. So welcome, Sam and sorry, your name has just blanked. Sylvain, thank you. We should probably start with just an introduction of, can you tell us what Formula E is? Because we've heard about Formula 1 for many years, it's gotten a lot of press, but Formula E is something different and trying to do some things in a different way.
Hey guys, so firstly, hi, I'm Sam. I'm the racing driver for DS Virgin Racing. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you this afternoon while you guys are enjoying your lunch. What is Formula E? So Formula E is a pretty new championship. The E obviously stands for electric, which is very, very important. It's the first all-electric single-seater championship globally. So that's pretty unique, pretty cool. As you know, guys, EVs are the way of the future, which makes Formula E so exciting. There's more manufacturers now in Formula E than there are in Formula 1, for example. So big manufacturers are seeing Formula E as a way of their first steps in electric vehicles. Learning from Formula E, and what they learn in Formula E they can put on the production line and put into the cars of tomorrow. So Formula E serves a really good purpose for the future, and it's growing and evolving and improving every single year.
So Sylvain, I want to ask you, you're CTO for a racing team. How is the role of CTO in that organization, do you think, the same as CTO for a more conventional business, and how is it different from being CTO for somebody that has manufacturing plants that stay in one place?
First, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I suppose it's pretty different, I guess. Although every business is different, right? Not just because it's motorsport. But I have two main responsibilities. The first one is technology, and the second one is operations. And the two are obviously intertwined, because you cannot win races if you don't have good operations, and you cannot win races if you don't have good technology, as well as drivers and many other elements. So being the CTO of a racing team is basically a combination of making sure you develop accurately all the short-term objectives to make sure that you're always developing and improving to win the next race in the current season you're in. But also I need to always make sure that I never forget to keep also focusing on the longer term stuff, because especially car technology, you don't develop that kind of things overnight. So as we are racing during a given season, we also have a parallel development program for next season and maybe even the season after that. And we do that in collaboration with a car manufacturer to help us do that. So that's what the challenge is, I guess. It's like, unlike many companies where you have one objective and you work at that, in a motorsport team, especially in Formula E, you have a lot of parallel programs with different time frames, different objectives, and a relatively small team. So one of my other goals is to make sure I provide all the tools and equipment to make my team as efficient as they can be, to make sure that we maximize our resources.
And the Formula E has been running now for, this is season 4 that's coming close to a close. There must have been some fairly serious evolution, both in terms of the technology and the vehicles, as well as the supporting technologies. Can you talk a little bit about how things have evolved over those 4 years?
Yes, for sure. So we are now in the 4th season. We are about to finish the 4th season, and Sam is in the hunt for the title, which is fantastic. So the last doubleheader races will be in New York, mid-July. And yes, I think it's fair to say that the sport has changed tremendously in the last 4 years, simply because you need to look at Formula E as a motorsport startup, basically. When we started 4 years ago, we had a good idea and we knew what we wanted to achieve, but it's not every day that you start a brand new motorsport series worldwide with a new technology. Basically, it never happens. So the first year or two were pretty much startup mode, when we were putting together all the fundamentals of the business for the series, but also for the teams. And it was also just a huge learning curve from everyone involved, from the broadcasters to the promoters to the teams, for us to understand the technology, understand how we can help our drivers to make the most of these cars. And then what I guess surprised most people is simply the rate of growth of this championship and the success that we have encountered. I mean, I personally have always been very bullish about it, and I knew it would be a great success, but no one anticipated for the growth to be so rapid, which is very exciting. It's great news for everyone involved, but it's also creating a lot of challenges, of course, in terms of budget control and relevance of the tech and so on. So yeah, and I think looking ahead, what's really exciting is, when you look at our curve and our trend over the last 4 years, if you project that for the next 5 years, who knows? But I think it's going to be very exciting.
Cool. And Sam, you're currently number 2 in the driver standings, and 2 races left in New York. From what I read, you won both of those races last year. How are you feeling about the end of your season?
It's exciting. In all honesty, we came into this season thinking that it might be quite difficult, to be honest. We didn't upgrade our powertrain, drivetrain, for this season with our partners DS. The decision was made not to make a step forwards in technology, and we believed that because of that it would be a difficult year due to the fact that our main rivals did make a step in performance. However, we've made steps behind the scenes, so in our operations and in all of the little things, minor details, mechanics not making mistakes, engineers being on point, myself not making many mistakes, and in conjunction with our partners, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, we've been able to work really hard on the data side and make sure that we get everything correct and efficiently and on time and as quickly as possible. And it's really paid dividends. We came into the season, I won the first race of the year. We are second at the moment, 23 points behind the leader. I think I've had 6 or 7 podiums. Been in the Super Pole, the top 5 shootout for pole position, the most of any other driver. So yeah, we've been extremely competitive when, like I said, at the beginning of the year, I thought we'd be top 10. Now we're top 2, and we do have a legitimate shot at the title.
Well, you're top 2. The team is, what, number 3 at this point?
The team is number 3.
But you'll succeed together.
Absolutely. It's a team effort. It is a team effort. And even though my teammate may not have had the most successful of seasons, genuinely, he's been very important and instrumental to getting us to where we are today.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, Sam, is you've driven everything from karts all the way up to F1. How is the Formula E vehicle different to drive than other things that you've driven?
It's very different in many ways. The mindset of the driving is very different. So when I was in F1, firstly, the Formula 1 car is a very predictable car to drive. You know exactly what it's going to do all the time, and I think that a Formula 1 car to drive quickly is actually quite a bit easier than driving a Formula E car on some of the circuits that we go to. Formula 1 these days, you go to a normal circuit and there's normally tons of runoff. You can make mistakes, go wide, it's okay, you come back on. You can go over the limit to find the limit. Formula E, if you go over the limit, you're in a wall because we race on street circuits. It's as simple as that. The mentality of a race is different in the fact that in F1 and GP2, the series below F1, I was thinking mainly about tyre life. I wasn't concerned about fuel effect. I wasn't concerned about anything else like that. It was purely looking after the tyres and trying to go as fast as possible. Formula E, yes, you're trying to go as fast as possible, but you've only got 28 kilowatts per car. So I've got 2 cars at the moment. Next year's 1 car, but right now it's 2 cars. I have to manage that 28 kilowatts in each car very efficiently to hit a target per lap. If I go over 28 kilowatts, I'm disqualified effectively. So I've got an amount per lap that I can use. That means either attacking, defending, staying at the correct pace. It's very, very difficult in order to do that, especially when regen levels are changing. They're increasing, decreasing, which means that my brake bias is changing all the time. It can be very hot in some places, so the battery can overheat very quickly. There's so much to think about during a race that it is the most difficult championship I've ever had to do? Just shout.
In a conventional race car, you get so much feedback. You know, you're getting feedback from the engine, the transmission, you're getting tire feedback. How in the heck do you drive these things when there's so little feedback coming in to the driver, or are you simply watching all the instruments and things?
You see, it's actually the opposite of what you would think, because with a normally aspirated vehicle, with a V10 absolutely roaring in your ears, you can't hear really anything else. In the Formula E car, because it is relatively quiet, there is still some noise. I can hear every single aspect of my racing car. I can hear the chattering of the suspension over the curbs. I can hear a rear wheel lockup. I can hear a front tire lockup. I can differentiate between the two. Obviously, I still get the same feelings and feedback through my bum and my back in order to feel the oversteer, feel understeers through the steering. So in actual fact, my senses heightened because of the lower noise level in the drivetrain respect. I've got a load of other noises going on that now I can use to my advantage.
And to add to that, the second important point is vibration. There is no vibration in an electric car, where in a high-powered internal combustion engine would create a lot of vibrations in the chassis and so on. Yeah. So it's actually easier, because we are trying to push this car to the limit. It's actually easier to find the limit on an electric car rather than a petrol car, internal combustion engine, because your sensors are more accurate and you have less pollution because of the absence of noise and vibration. So I know it's anti-natural, it's a very good question, we get it all the time, but it's what it is.
I have a question. So there's obviously constant data transfer between all the instruments, and then your obviously management of that data, because you have all these limitations with what you can and can't do to stay qualified and so forth. What goes wrong? From an instrumentation standpoint, or even from a data flow standpoint, what can happen to the driver in the sense that a sensor is lost or something along those lines that can affect ultimately what you know and what's happening within the car?
In the race, the most difficult thing is hitting the numbers per lap. So we work very, very hard on a simulator to come up with the best strategy for the race, the best lift points and regen points. So I can't drive the race flat out. I've got to lift off the throttle at some points down the straights in order to not use any energy. And then I pull a thing called the regen paddle, where it sort of tips a tiny little bit of energy back into the battery so that I'm getting a little bit back. Now, there's techniques that we use in order to do that the most efficient way possible. But like I said, you can have temperature-related issues. You can have a hot cell in the battery that creates big issues as well. The radio communication can go down, and then I'm blind, I'm driving on my own, and I've got to manage things on my own. So there are many obstacles that we have to face that can put us under a lot of pressure. But the team managed them so well, and we've got so much information on the dash that is never wrong. The dash never lies to me, that I can, to be honest, I could do the race on my own without speaking to the engineer. It would probably be slower, because I like having the information from the engineer on exactly what I need to do, and he can tell me what everybody else around me is doing to help me. Whereas if I'm on my own, I don't have the information. But you know, I get everything that I need on the dash all the time, and it is always correct.
So I'd be interested. I mean, mistakes happen, so we're not perfect.
They're mainly me.
Yeah. So I didn't want to point fingers.
Not anymore.
If I stuff it in the wall, it's my fault.
But when
none this year. None this year.
So when you're inefficient, let's say in a first couple of laps or whatever, in a process, if you're inefficient in a race, you only have 28 kilos for the rest of the race, for the rest of the race. What data helps you get back into competing against your competitors who may have more energy left?
Well, we've worked hard in conjunction with, I've worked hard with the engineers and with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise to come up with programs and software that allow us to plot the exact graph of where we need to be energy-wise in relation to battery temperature-wise. So let's say the first 2 or 3 laps of the race, if I'm inefficient with my energy because I'm fighting, battling, or I'm just too slow, for example, I will be off target. My engineer will be telling me that live all the time. Sam, you need to now save more energy. I can then offset on the dash and transform my beeps to and my lift points to a lower level. So more lifting, more regenning, in accordance to what I need to achieve to get back on the right graph so that we finish the race. Because if I am being inefficient, if I'm using too much energy and being slow, it's a bad thing. We need to get back on that curve as soon as possible.
The way to look at it is it's like machine learning, but it's human learning. We're not doing machine learning yet. That's one of my main objectives. So over the last 4 years of racing and data that we have accumulated, we have now hundreds of scenarios where we know what is likely to happen in a given condition. So if we know that the track layout is X, so we know we're going to use X amount of energy per corner, per straight, and so on. If we know that the ambient temperature is 20 or 30 or whatever, which will impact the temperature of the battery, which in return will impact how much regen we can go back in the battery. All these elements are put back into a model, which means that when we are about to start the race, we have a pretty good idea of what the conditions are. And because we have been able to correlate data from the free practice sessions in the morning to the work that Sam has done in the simulator, we have normally a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. So you basically have 2 cars per driver to do an hour race. Each car has 28 kilowatt hour of energy in the battery. So the idea is to finish your stint with 0 energy left in the battery. In reality, you need a tiny bit of margin to make sure you cross the line, but you want that margin to be as low as possible, because if you come back in the pit with energy left in the battery, that means you could have gone faster. Right? Pretty simple. And then you start your second stint, and the same story goes again. But that's very much it's basically knowledge built over 4 years of data, plus a lot of hours spent by the engineers to develop these models. And what is interesting is that one of my main projects is to start to put some real machine learning into it, because we have now so much data over 4 years of racing and about 50 races, that we're probably getting to a point now where we have enough critical mass to start to derive some interesting insights. Because pretty much all forms of racing in history up to now, it's always been the same way. Drivers come back with some feedback on what the car is doing, and then engineers try to correlate and understand that behavior looking at data. And most of the time, when you have a very good driver like Sam, what he will say about the car behavior, we will be able to see that exact same thing on the data. But as an overall process, it's still human beings, engineers, looking at data, but they know what the problem is, and they are trying to find a solution for that problem. What has never really been done yet is to apply some machine learning over time, which will take time, to basically identify trends that we didn't even know about. There might be a correlation out there that I don't know about, which is, on the X kind of track surface with X kind of temperature and X kind of layout. That means that we can probably go to a setup that's something like this, because that's what the data is saying. But it's way too much information for any human being to find that out. So switching the mindset from having engineers looking for a solution to a problem that they know, which is by definition you are being quite restrictive in what you're looking at. If we open our horizons and basically let the machine let loose on the data, come up with some trends, tell me what you can identify, I'm pretty sure that over time we're going to find some interesting patterns. But of course, it's only 5 years of data. Ask me the question again in 10 years' time, and it will be a lot better. And as these algorithms are getting better, of course, it will become more accurate. So that's a really exciting part of the future of motorsports. Is how to. My job is always to provide the best possible tools and algorithm and software to help this guy drive the car. And this is a never-ending job. That's what's really exciting. You can always do more and be more accurate and come up with more projections and forecasts to basically make it better.
So, kind of build on some of that is I have a V10 fully adjustable coilovers and rear wing setup car, I understand the adjustments of that from a mechanics perspective. And how has this evolution into Formula E changed the mechanics role from being that person that knows how to tune and adjust a wrench, adjust a spoiler, adjust a downforce settings, to be able to get you dialed in per what your track limits are from the industry standards? How much of this machine learning and active aero is going to be playing into this role, where now we're getting to the point where it's a lot harder to keep consistency amongst cars, so that it is really, like you said, you put it in the wall, that was you that put it into the wall. It wasn't a computer switching an angle on your attack when you're coming into a corner to give you more downforce. Is there anything in the industry that's limiting what the machine learning can do automatically, so that it's still very much so a driver's event?
I mean, I speak on behalf of I think Sylvain will be able to say more about the software side of things in that respect. But with regards to the setup of the car, for example, it is still a race car, and we still set it up as a conventional racing car. We race on street circuits. There is no real change, say, from when I drove my F1, my GP2 to Formula E. It still has springs, dampers, normal suspension, aerodynamics, and we treat it exactly the same. You know, we adjust ride height, swing, damping, all of these things like we would a conventional single-seater. So from that respect, just because it's an EV, that doesn't change very much. A setup of a racing car is a setup, and you go racing. So the mechanic's job hasn't changed very much in that side of things, but you'll probably have more to say on other things.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and actually we thought about that when we started the championship. We have technical working groups between the teams, the FIA, which is the governing body, and the promoters, and we thought, what should this championship be? What are we trying to promote? What are we trying to develop? And it's a very long story, so I'll give you the short version. But we basically said, okay, it needs to remain a driver championship, and if the whole car and technology is taken over by computers, it becomes something else which we're working on, which is robo race, and there's no driver in it, and you might as well go all the way. And we're also doing something pretty cool on that. But this is a driver in a team championship. So what we've done is that we decided to focus all our energies, resources, investments on the technology that matters, which is the electric technology, the technology that we're trying to improve to make a difference to the cars that you and I will be driving very soon on the road. So in a nutshell, all the chassis of the cars are the same for the teams. The bodywork and the aero is also the same for everyone. So we're not allowed to design a new wing. We have to use the mandated one. All we can do is what Sam talked about, which is the setup, more or less downforce and all the mechanical setup. That's basically the chassis setups kind of things. However, on the powertrain side, we are free to design the entire powertrain. So we get the same battery for everyone, but then from the battery to the wheel, everything is designed by us. So the inverter, the electric motor, gearbox, differential, draft shaft, and then all the software, the looms, and the ECU that goes with it, all of this is designed by us. And the idea is that having 10 or 12 teams competing every year, trying to develop a new powertrain with more power, more efficiency, and so on, will lead to very rapid progression of tech. And this is what's been happening over the last 4 years. With the same amount of energy in the battery, we are now able to go up to 20% faster, using about 20% less energy. That's just incredible in 3 or 4 years of efficiency. So we are now reaching take the comparison to your V10 engine, which is where it gets interesting. We are now talking to a system efficiency. So if you put 100 units of energy in your battery, so it could be electricity, it could be petrol, whatever, but 100 units of energy in the battery, between 90 and 95 of that energy goes to the wheel. So we're only wasting 5 to 10% throughout the entire process from the battery to the drive shaft. In comparison, a very finely tuned race petrol engine is about 30%. And the normal big block V8 would be 15 to 20. So you'd be wasting 80%. So for the same 100 units of energy, petrol in that case, you'll be wasting 80% of it through heat and friction. And that energy, you will never see it again. It's wasted through friction and heat. So you lost it, and that's it. When electric vehicles not only are extremely efficient, but also every time you're braking, you get some energy back in the battery, right? And we are again making big improvements on this. We can now regen at 150 kilowatts, which is the equivalent to about 220 horsepower of energy going back in your battery. Again, to take you, it's like going into your petrol car and going from 5th gear to back to 1st. That's the kind of braking force you're getting if you get full regen. So all these aspects are what we can play with, what we can tune to make sure that we are hitting the main target of Formula E, which is to develop relevant technology, which all the manufacturers are using to develop some really cool electric road cars that are coming in the next 2 years. But because of the regulations around aero and chassis and so on, it remains a driver championship, which at the end of the day, we can spend all the energy we want, develop the best possible powertrain, the most efficient one, the most powerful one. We can have the best race strategy in the world, all the stuff we're doing. At the end of the day, it's Sam driving the car. And if he doesn't nail the qualifying lap and we start at the back, it's going to be hard. And that's always down to him.
And that's why I'm asking you for more money.
This is, more and more public forum for that.
So, I think last time that you guys were in front of us, we talked about the amount of data that was generated on the car. So, I've kind of a loaded question here: is how much data does get generated? How much has to stay on the vehicle and get used in that computer process? How much gets transferred to the pit for the engineers real time? And how much gets downloaded and used after the race? And I'm assuming there's also data going to the actual Formula E to keep track of all the cars on the race. So can you talk about the data that's used, how it's transferred from the car to the pit and out and that way?
So again, this is a little bit like the chassis regulations. The more data you give us and the more data we have to work with, the more we're going to do, and also, of course, the higher the budgets are going to go. So there's a limit that you have to find here. And it's the same in every other motorsport, including F1 and other series. So in terms of quantity of data, it's not that much. We generate maybe, I think, 5 to 10 gigabytes for a car for the entire day through free practice session, qualifying, and racing. But the reason for it is that you're only logging bytes, 1 and zeros of movements of dampers or speed traces or whatever. There's no large video files or anything that's on the broadcast side. So you're looking at just sensors that tell you 1 or 0 every at 100 hertz rate or whatever. So that's the reason. What is really interesting though, it's not the amount of data, because these days the amount of data doesn't really matter, right? You can generate 100 terabytes or whatever, all you need is more compute power, you shove another server there and that's job done, right? It's not really an issue. What's interesting here is the fact that we collect this data, but it comes in so many different formats and channels. That's the challenge. You have the video feed, audio files, live telemetry, race car data that we download from the car itself, battery temperatures, all the mechanical stuff from the sensors on the dampers and all these things. So we have maybe, I think, between 150 and 200 channels that are logging data at 100 hertz every single time. And what is interesting and a good case study for other industries is the rapidity at which we need to analyze that data. So let's take a scenario. We're in free practice 1 in the morning, which is a really important session because that's when we want to correlate real-world data versus what we've been doing at the sim. So Sam will go out for 10 minutes and do 8 or 10 laps. We're going to come back. And then we have pretty much 3 or 4 minutes to basically get Sam's feedback, look at the data to make sure that what Sam is saying, we actually see that on the data, then talk to basically come up with improvements or things we want to do better on the second run, and then go again. So that's very unique. There aren't many industries when you have a few minutes, this huge time pressure to not only gather all that data, organize it in a way you want. In our case, the best way of doing it is to synchronize all of that data against time of day, which is actually very difficult when it comes from so many different channels in so many different formats. It actually took us a lot of time to do it. So then when Sam comes back, he can say, I want to understand what happened turn 10 on my third lap. We can go there, and then instantly we can see what the car behavior was on the vehicle dynamics. We can see what the battery, the motor, the inverter was doing. We can link that with the video feed to see what happened. And very quickly, in a matter of minutes, we can make decisions. That's the key challenge in terms of data.
To follow into his question.
Yep.
So I'm on the RF side. It's a lot of RF. That's a lot of data that's coming off of each one of those cars. And it sounds like latency is the main issue. You have to have that data immediately. There can't be any lag whatsoever. What do you guys use to communicate from the vehicle? Is it? It's not Wi-Fi, but what is it that you guys use from Bluetooth? What is it that you guys use between the car and the pit, or the car and the machine?
So the FIA. So one thing I should have clarified: a lot of that data we don't get to live telemetry. We only get the data when the cars come back into the garage. So we get some amount of live telemetry, but it's restricted on purpose by the FIA to make sure that budgets stay under control. Because if the more channels are open for live telemetry, the more engineers I need to basically process that data. So it will gradually open up. But the idea again is not to make it just an engineering championship. It's also to make it a driver championship. So there's a limitation there. But we still get a lot of information through live telemetry about battery, the voltage and temperature of every single cell, because that could be a safety issue, and a few other things. But most of the data we get when the car comes back in the garage, which is really easy. We just plug it, and it comes back. But even that, in the first year, when the car was coming back in the garage, it would take a minute and a half for all of the data to go through the server, to a central server, then goes out to the engineers' laptops, and then being put in the format that we like. Now we can do that in about 10 seconds, which, as you can imagine, makes a huge difference if you only have 2 or 3 minutes to look at it. That's the key thing. In terms of data transmissions, it's quite simple. Every single car in the championship has a FIA data logger that is the same for everyone, which is made by Magneti Marelli, and will basically send all of that data live to the FIA, which is the world governing body. So these are the guys who have the most live telemetry data. They can see even the battery, state of charge, and all these kind of things. And then the FIA will send some of that data to the broadcasters, because actually Formula E is quite cool to watch for fans, because you get so much more data than other championships, so it's quite good. And then some of that data is sent back to us as teams. And that's kind of the process. But for the rest, as Sam mentioned, it's actually good old-fashioned radio. We rely on radio, for example, during the race, for Sam to tell us what is the state of charge of the battery, not in percentage, but in kilowatt-hour numbers. And then we basically plot these numbers on the chart and the model I was talking about earlier to make sure that we finish the stint at zero energy. And we do it that way. This is the situation now. Ask me again in a few years' time, it's probably going to be quite different. But like every sport, you need to manage, there's a sporting aspect to it. And if you open all of the data to everyone, then you would have a big disparity between the big teams with a lot of budgets and a lot of resources to analyze data and the small teams. And you would end up in a situation that no one wants to see, which means that you know already who's going to win every race. And the very fine balance that we always thread, and you get the jigs by now, is the fact that at the end of the day, the sporting aspect is really important. And for this racing championship to be successful, it needs to be exciting. And for the fans to want to watch it. And even people like me, I mean, I know pretty much everything there is to know about this sport, and I can't tell you who's going to win a race before going to a race somewhere. I just can't tell you. And that's the beauty of that sport. So we need to keep it that way.
So much about racing is compromise and trade-offs. And, when you talk to F1 drivers and Indy drivers, it's all about grip. Put the wing on, get the grip set up. But when I look at the design of the cars, you don't run anywhere near the kind of grip, and I look at the tyre sizes and they're small. So what's your design center? What are you optimized around? What is the trade-off? Do you give up grip for more speed? Do you give up, aero, mechanical grip, just for speed?
The main thing, obviously qualifying, I'm going for out-and-out pace and performance of the racing car. Yeah. So whatever that might be, some circuits it might be a low downforce setup, high ride height. Other circuits it might be the complete opposite. But in the race, it's all about efficiency. So you need a car that is good in a straight line, good on the brakes, good in the corners, but also consistent. So you need a car that it might be really efficient for the first 4 laps to run low downforce, because less drag in a straight line equals efficiency. However, running low downforce creates more temperature on the rear tires, which means you slide more, which is inefficient, because then your minimum speeds will be lower, which then creates inefficiency in a straight line. So there's a trade-off. So you're having to think about these things all the time. It's not always about the low downforce, less drag game. Sometimes it's actually better to think about the long game. Okay, the first 3 or 4 laps might be a bit more painful, but after that, you're going to pay dividends with having the high downforce because of the tire pressure and the tire temperatures, etc., to go the high downforce route. So there's plenty of things to look at.
And again, to keep for the theme of today, exactly as Sam said and you said, it's all about compromises. But the question is, how do you reach that best compromise, and how do you understand what is going to be the exact optimum in terms of a setup, not only mechanical setup, but also software and energy management. And the way we do that, we have pretty advanced lap simulator algorithms that basically simulate the car going around the track for a given layout. And we'll basically we'll do a sweep of aero setups, and same on the mechanical side, and hopefully that will give us an indication of what is the optimum setup. But again, in the future, I think there will be another way of doing it, back to my machine learning point, which will be to look at all our historical data, and then that will also tell us, on average, for that kind of track layout, that kind of temperature, that kind of surface on the track, and so on average, we've been more successful when we had to set up more like this rather than like this. So the combination of top-down analytical approach versus machine learning bottom-up will hopefully give us very good insights.
So we actually have a question off of the Twitch live channel, going back to the data collection and downloading it and bringing it in. Is it to a point where you could actually get into a simulated situation and actually rerun your race and see the maybe get indications of where things went wrong, or maybe what you might have missed during the race or anything like that?
Yes, absolutely, and we do that every race. So it's a good question because we talk about, of course, a lot about what we do with the data during the race, during the event, from pre-practice, qualifying, and race. But data is also extremely important for post-race analysis. And we have between 2 and 3 weeks between races. So that's the only time that we have time, and we can actually use that data. So we do all of this. We have so many pieces of software to do it. One of them is our race strategy software that, as I said, takes all of that data and synchronizes against time of day, which means we can replay the whole race. And then we can see that at certain points in time, things happen, whether it's down to our strategy or whether it's down to what happened on external factors. There's a safety car, there's an accident somewhere, or another, the guy in front or behind us has changed strategy at the last minute and pitted earlier or later than we expected. All these things happen. And every time we do this, we learn and we basically make our model more accurate. So we do this every time, yeah.
So could you rerun a race and maybe make probably minor changes? So what would have happened if you would have turned a little bit left and a little bit right?
Yeah, it's part of the correlation. So the correlation is two-way. We do a lot of simulator work to prepare for a race, and it's both, as I said, lab sim, which is a computer basically with a car going around the track, and then we take Sam going to an actual real simulator, and then make sure that running qualifying laps, race laps, and so on. Then we go to the track, and in free practice one we correlate real data versus that simulator. That's the first phase. But then after the event, when we go back to the factory, we do the return phase of the correlation, which means we can then rerun the entire race or qualifying or whatever happened with the real world data, which then we use to improve our simulator model. And again, after having done that for 45 or 50 races, that now gives us a much better model. So it's a virtuous cycle of data coming from sim to real world back to sim, and going on like this. And after so many iterations, you end up in a situation where it's pretty accurate.
I mean, the more races we do, as Sylvain said, the more we're learning and understanding, and the more complex my simulator days are becoming. So at the beginning, we would just drive and we'd do a couple of race runs where I'd practice a bit of energy efficiency and some qualifying laps, and that would be it. Now, the engineers are throwing things at me now that are real-world scenarios in the races that I get. We are upping the ambient, we are lowering the ambient, we are upping the grip level, we are lowering the grip level. We are throwing safety cars into the mix, slow zones in the mix, full course yellows, red flags, traffic, anything that could happen in reality, we now practice in the simulator, so that when I go to the race, we feel 100% prepared for that race. And if anything does happen during the race that we haven't encountered before, which is, to be honest, pretty rare, next sim session we will be practicing and ready for it, so that we learn from it and we never have that situation again.
Like a giraffe or something like that.
The day a giraffe comes on the track, then yeah, we got some issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we talked about the data that you have. What's some data that you wish you had? Is there like some sort of data that you're not gathering that you wish you could, whether that's restricted from Formula E in general or just that technology's not there yet, but you as a driver and you as a technologist, do you have anything else you wish you could get that you can't currently?
As Sylvain said, the amount of live data that the teams had is pretty restricted. It's that way for a reason, and I understand it. It's in some ways frustrating that the team can't have more. As a driver, I would love my engineer to be able to get all the channels that you could possibly look at available all the time. But as Sylvain said, it's a drivers' championship, and it needs to remain that way. for it to be a successful sport. There are some things that I would love to look at as an extra. So like ghost car analysis, where if I watch my onboard, I could overlay a ghost car of the fastest onboard that is currently available from qualifying or free practice, and basically as you probably had in racing games, you sort of ghost car the other car to see exactly where he's been on the track, where he's braked, in exact relation to the same frame as where you are. Now that could be very helpful, instead of just watching yours, then watching his, and guessing what he's doing. But that's something that I would like. If you can get that for me, Sylvain, that'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. As we just need the data, right? And there's no limit in technology, to answer your question. These days the sensor technology is so amazing. If you're allowed to put the sensors in and get the data, you can do whatever you want, right? So on the engineering side, for sure, we could always do with more. For example, we could in testing we put torque sensors on drive shafts, which means you can measure the real live efficiency of your system at any point in time. If we had that in racing, we could come up with some very elaborated ways of tuning the software to make sure that we are using the energy at the right place and not wasting it when we are at a low efficiency point of the powertrain, for example. That's one example out of hundreds. We could use a lot. But at the end of the day, it's back to Sam was saying and what I was saying earlier. It's a fine line between, if you give the engineers everything they want, you'll make it an engineer championship, and the cars will basically drive by themselves. So it's a fine line to decide what you give and what you don't give. I think the reality is it will improve gradually over years. So I'm sure at some point we're going to get the live SoC of the battery through live telemetry, which will help a lot on many processes. But again, you have to be careful. If you open up too much data, then you have the teams with the bigger budgets that will be able to do more with it. So there's a sporting aspect as well there.
Which is the case in F1. F1, they've pretty much got everything open that they could ever imagine, and you've got 50, 60 engineers at the racetrack looking at their own channels because there's so many of them. That's the case in the bigger teams. The smaller teams may have half the size of people, and they just can't, they cannot go through to the same extent the data as, say, Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull. And that's why Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari are at the front. And that's because they've just got the manpower, they've got the data channels, they've got the budgets in order to pay these people to look through these things and learn from them at a greater rate than the smaller teams. That's the way it is.
Do you have, you mentioned on your dash, there's a lot of things in there that you can see. Is there, do you have a heads-up display, or is there anything futuristic inside your helmet or on your dash that really takes it? Like you talk about Ghost Car, I think about Mario Kart, but you talk about Ghost Car, having that in front of you. Are there any technology advances coming down the pipe like that to help you? Not just, I understand that you're trying to drive efficiencies with the car, but to help the driver do some pretty remarkable things. What does that look like for the future?
I think anything on my visor would be a distraction. I find a fly on the visor a distraction, let alone numbers and figures. It's good enough for me on the dash, to be honest. I don't want some kind of Iron Man display going on in front of me.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, like, on the road car. On the road car, it makes a lot of sense because we are not race drivers, so we are not trained to do that, and we don't have that speed and brain agility to be able to do 10 different things at once while driving. So it's helpful for drivers on the road. But in terms of the Ghost Car, for example, is a good example. It's actually really easy to do. All we need to have is all of the data of the competitors, and then we can easily do a graphic model of that. But obviously, we're not getting that data. Just starting this season, we're now getting the GPS speed trace of all the other cars, which is very exciting for us. It's only one data log, but that tells us a lot about the efficiencies and the performance they're achieving simply by being able to follow their speed at any point in time on the track. So you could start to develop a Ghost Car program visualization based on that data, but it's not enough. If you want to do a very accurate one, you need all of the other data, steering angle and everything to be able to model it properly. So that's what's exciting, I guess, is that anything's possible. It's just a question of doing it in the right time and with the right purpose, which is why you have what you guys see on TV is the racing part, and then we have testing, and testing is a lot more open than racing. So we can put a lot more sensors on the car and we can do a lot more analysis. But then when it comes to the races themselves, you need to make it fair between all the competitors.
Can you talk a little about how Formula E is affecting the wider, both the technology that's in electric vehicles for wider population, also the public perception of what electronic vehicles, EVs, are about, and just shifting them from being the slowpoke, totally uninteresting vehicle to possibly being something that people would consider, and how that sort of plays into what possibly even what Tesla are doing.
Yeah. Well, that's usually, it's a good question. That's usually where we start. That's the foundation of this championship. The two main pillars of Formula E and the raison d'être, the reason why we do this, is two things. First, it's a technology championship, and it has been created to basically have a lot of clever people competing to develop the best possible powertrains. And if you do that, it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to drive the technology forward and come up with new innovations. That's the first pillar, to really develop fast track the development of the tech. And something that would have taken 10 years, we're going to do it in 2 or 3. That's basically what's happening. The second pillar is marketing and promotion. That's the one we are not reinventing the wheel. Actually, motorsport has always been very good at that. If you want to promote road car technologies and transportation solutions, motorsport is a great way of doing it. So if we can just put really fast electric cars on the track, and you can see drivers battling out and achieving incredible lap times, then in your subconscious, if you're watching TV, after watching and watching again, it will become really obvious. It will become embedded in your brain that if these cars can do it, for sure they're probably good enough to do your school run or grocery trip or whatever. But it takes time. Nothing happens overnight. But that's the idea. So if we succeed, the KPIs for us to measure the success of Formula E and us as a team are always back to these two things. Are we moving the needle? Are we developing the tech? And yes, we are. We have made incredible advanced improvements over the last 3 years. And as Sam mentioned, we are going to next generation car next year. That's basically twice the amount of energy in the battery, 30% more power, much faster car, while covering a much more longer distance and being more efficient. So we're improving all of the levers that you can play with the car, which is really fantastic. And then on the marketing and media side, the sport is growing, I think, by 30 or 40% every year, and we are now, I think, the third biggest motorsport in terms of international series after F1 and MotoGP. So it's fantastic, but we'll see how it goes in the next 5 years.
Can you mentioned a couple times, you've mentioned some of the enhancements that have been made through things that you've learned on the track. Are there any examples that have been put out into production by any of the car manufacturers that are directly attributable to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, it's coming. So you have to keep in mind, Formula E was started 4 years ago, the first race, and so really the real progress in technology has been happening in the last 2 years when we had 2 years of data. So literally right now, all the car manufacturers and people like us, all the engineering companies that have been involved in developing this tech, now have a very good idea of where we started, what we've done that worked, what we've done that didn't work, and what is really the good solution. Pretty much now is the time when we have a very good idea. So you will see, in terms of practical terms, in the next 12 to 18 months, at least in Europe, I think a lot of them are coming to the States as well, a lot of very cool electric cars, road cars, coming from the large manufacturers like Jaguar, Audi, and DS, our partner, and so on. And these cars will have taken a lot of learnings from Formula E. So some of them will be almost sports cars, almost to the point you could argue are using the exact same powertrain as a Formula E car. You could do that. That's the beauty of an electric transmission. You could take the whole powertrain of our Formula E car, put it in the sports car chassis, and this is a car that would happily sit in traffic for 2 hours and then do your grocery shopping, that's the beauty of electric vehicle technology. But the reality is that all the manufacturers are taking all these learnings, the improvements in efficiency on the motor and the inverter side. These have been the main areas of development, and then applying these learnings to develop mass volume production components. So the reality is that now you'll have road cars that are 93-95% efficient, where before Formula E 5 years ago they were 80-85%. Which means that for free, you basically get 10-15% more range for the same amount of battery in your car. That's one of them, but there are many more.
The Renault team, there's a team in Formula E called EDAMS Renault. I know for a fact that what they've learned over the last 2-3 seasons has helped create the new Renault Zoe that has come out recently. So it's already filtering down from Formula E onto the production line, and into cars that are coming on the road now and in the future. And that's why so many manufacturers are getting involved as well. It's not just a marketing tool to say, hey guys, we're involved in Formula E because electric vehicles are going to be the future. No, they're in it now to learn to produce better electric vehicles for now and the future. They're in it for a reason also, as well as marketing.
And you have to keep in mind, on average, it's hard to do statistics, but on average, over the last 40, 50 years, it would take 10 to 15 years for an innovation to go from the track to the road. That's the kind of amount of time you're looking at, especially on the internal combustion engine side. Direct injection and all these things that have improved efficiency. It takes a very, very long time. With electric car technology, within 1 or 2 years, you could translate an entire powertrain into a road vehicle. Obviously with changes in terms of the cost of components. One of our motors will cost upwards of 100,000 euros, right? You're not going to put that into a road car, but you could learn so much from that motor to get almost the same performance for a fraction of the cost. So that's very quick. And the second aspect we should not forget is that at the end of the day, an electric road car is 50% software. Really, software guides everything you do with that car. Not only the components, but how you use the energy from the battery to the motor, how you're managing it, and so on. And that can be immediately transferable. So you have manufacturers that we are learning. We are still constantly learning about how to manage that energy, and all the manufacturers involved are doing that, getting that data back to the factory, and then transferring that to the road car guys to make sure they're using it. So you can have, and it's already the case with Tesla, and you see others, when every 2 or 3 months you get an update and your car gets better and better. All the car manufacturers are going to move to that model, and that can only be done with electric cars. So that's the exciting bit.
Yeah, the software thing is a great point, and you look at the difference between us and Formula One. Formula One, it did used to be the place where manufacturers would showcase their new things, and that would filter down onto road cars. But I don't think that's the case anymore, really, because Formula One now is a high performance materials race and an aerodynamic race. The materials that are used in Formula One are so expensive. They're sort of aerospace materials that you cannot afford to put on a road car unless you're buying some kind of £1 million hypercar. And most of us around here, I don't know, guys, but I can't afford them. Whereas, with Formula E, it's software based, and that is immediately transferable, and it doesn't cost anything. Like it's yet. But that's what's great. The materials in F1, it's crazy, and yeah.
So returning to race day, what kind of factors set you up for success on race day around the whole team and the whole setup, and what sort of things, what worries you, Sylvain, on race day that might go wrong with the tech?
Everything worries me on race day. Anything that doesn't go to plan, which is a lot of things very often. As I said, it's back to the short answer is, to be successful in Formula E, you need to be very well prepared. And we knew that from the beginning, but as Sam said, we are doing it more and more and in a better and better way every time. So because our models and our data and our correlation gets so much better and so much more accurate, we are now getting to race day having a pretty good idea of what we're expecting for a set of given conditions. However, we definitely cannot plan for everything. And the most challenging aspect is what happens during the race itself, because there are literally billions of possible permutations of a race strategy. And that's why race strategy, again, the future will be machine learning, because computers will be able to process much more data than any engineer could ever. So the challenge is that you can go through free practice 1 and qualifying, and Sam puts it on pole or P2, P3 or whatever, and all of these things we can expect, and we are getting better and better at it. So we know that going to a track, we pretty much expect that mechanical setup to be the fastest. We expect that energy management system to be the fastest, and so on. But once the race starts, millions of different things can happen, and we have to react quickly. So the way to prepare for that is to run a very sophisticated strategy software that basically helps us in our decision making and calculates automatically, basically learning what the F1 guys are doing, because they are the best at doing that at the moment. Trying to understand and get all the data we possibly can, put the data into that machine, and the machine will tell us or give us some pointers on what we should be doing. But at the end of the day, it's a human decision, and it's Sam's engineer I have 12 or 13 engineers on the track, but it's a one-to-one relationship between each driver and its own engineer. And the engineer on the radio to Sam will basically tell him what to do in case of really unforeseen circumstances, like a really early safety car or things that were difficult to plan. That's a never-ending task, from the last 50 or 60 years of motorsport to the next 50 years of motorsport. There's always going to be something new that never happened before that we couldn't really plan. So it's how we react to it. That's the difficulty. As an engineer and managing the engineering team, I don't like the unknown. I don't like what I don't know. But we have to accept and acknowledge that there's a lot that we don't know. So it's how you react and how you prepare for it.
So what are the HPE technologies and products that you bring with you to the track when race day rolls around?
So a lot at HPE. So when I started this team for 4.5 years ago, it became very apparent to me very quickly that obviously we needed to hire good drivers and develop good car technology and all the key pillars. But at the end of the day, race day operations were also going to be critical because of the fact that it's a one-day race event, because of the fact that we are in city centers and we race in temporary structures, basically a glorified tent. And sometimes we will go somewhere and we do a scan and we have 500 or 600 Wi-Fi networks around us, which can create a lot of pollution and make even the communication between the engineers and the car difficult sometimes. So there are a lot of fundamentals that you need to get right to go to race day. So from the beginning, it was very clear to me that having a really strong IT infrastructure would help our efficiency to operate as a team. So that's why we started to work with you guys from the beginning. For the first 2 years, we used a mix, a kind of traditional on-premise server, which was 3-part storage and moonshot servers, which were extremely powerful, a lot of compute power to run all our systems, but it was also a bit cumbersome and quite slow to set up and so on. This year for season 4, we switched to a completely new setup, and that's also the beauty of motorsport. We are a relatively small team, 45 people, and my IT manager has managed to transition and switch and start from scratch our entire IT infrastructure in 3 weeks. Like the whole IT infrastructure of the entire company switched from one infrastructure to another in 3 weeks, which is pretty impressive when you look at everything we do is database, right? And we are now using the latest SimpliVity Hyperconverged servers, which are fantastic. I mean, I make the joke, but I really mean it. It's like it was designed for motorsport. It's such a brilliant product because the main reasons are the fact that it's much smaller in size and weight, which matters because we are very limited in air freight we can carry around. So the smaller and the lighter you make things, the better. It's also using far less energy, which matters. That's what we're trying to do. But the main advantage is that we retain an awful lot of compute power and storage while making the system a lot easier to set up and operate. And that's the key thing. So I mentioned earlier, I'm only allowed to take a maximum of 20 operational staff at races, so about 20 to 12, 13 engineers and 7 or 8 mechanics. So I can only really justify one IT manager for the whole thing, which is quite scary because if we have any kind of IT glitch at any point during the day, we are talking about pretty serious setback. Any IT failure means that we can't even start up the cars to go on the track. So it's not as dramatic as that. But even if we miss some data from a few runs from Sam, we cannot correlate that data and we're always on the back foot to set up for the race. So it's really, really tricky. So Hyperconverged means that instead of taking 3 or 4 hours to set up on a Thursday when we get there, it only takes half an hour. It's basically like the convenience of a laptop, but with the power of a server. It's pretty incredible. But the second thing is during race day, with this one view software, it's all software based, which means that my one and only IT guy can basically have a view of all of our systems at any point in time. And then if there's anything that doesn't quite look quite right, he can just fix it straight away, or at least make a call to someone who can. So it's much better to identify and flag up potential issues. When before, we could have had a slow problem created somewhere, and we don't know until we have a failure, and then that would have been pretty dramatic. So touch wood, so far so good, but that's the big improvement. And then one thing I should mention, we are on the network side. It's obviously very important to have a strong network to communicate between the car and the garage, but also between the engineers and the cars as well. So there are many sub networks. And as I said, we go to city centers sometimes where there are so many networks out there that you can't even create the connection. So Aruba have developed for us a very bespoke system with a lot of access points in the garage to basically make sure that we have a very reliable, stable signal between the cars and the engineers, which means that, the idea is that Sam never has to worry about it because we never have an issue, but there's a lot of work done behind the scenes to make sure that every single time Sam's come back in the garage, the data is there in the right format at the right time, and that was not always the case before, so we are using that.
I find it intriguing that you've transitioned from a the moonshot gear through to a hyperconverged. It's kind of for what's essentially a high performance compute activity. It's not the direction of change that I would have expected.
Yeah. It's down to the fact that, remember, we are not processing millions of terabytes of data. It's more in the speed of which you can do it, and make sure that the reliability of the track is always there. That's the key thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to. We got more? Any more questions out in the field? Well, I think unless you guys have we missed anything important in your.
I don't think so. Very thorough and very good questions.
It's been really great having you guys here. Thank you very much for making the time to be with us. And we have one more.
One more for the road.
Just one quick question. If he does actually win the season, does he get more money?
Yeah, he probably will. And he has to jump in the East River as well and swim to the Statue of Liberty. Yeah.
Just to clarify, I don't want to win the championship for more money. I want to win the championship because I want to be a world champion. That's the main thing. I mean, it's something. Yeah, of course. But look, guys, it's I've been with the team since the beginning. I love the race team that I drive for. I love our partners. I get on extremely well with everybody, and this has been an amazing journey. I'm so proud that we've been able to achieve what we've achieved so far this season. And look, if we're destined to finish second, it's still been a superb season. There is a guy that has scored more points than me currently, and he is in pole position to win the championship. I'm 23 points behind, which means I've got to have a brilliant end of the year, and he's got to have a terrible end to the year for us to create a world championship winning season. So the odds are with him, and I'm the underdog currently. Let's see what happens. I'll give it my best shot in New York, absolutely. I hope that you guys can all tune in to the New York races. They should be very exciting, and I hope you guys will be supporting me. Otherwise, I won't be happy.
So when do you think Alonso is going to go into Formula E?
Do you know what? I was speaking to somebody at another race team, a silver race team, and they seem to think that by the year 2021, 2022, a certain Lewis Hamilton will be interested in Formula E to come in and drive in Formula E. So it's not going to be too long, I think, before we see big names from Formula One jump in. I don't think Fernando will be one of them. I think you will find Fernando Alonso in IndyCar next year or the year after, because he wants to achieve that triple crown. The triple crown, exactly. I don't know. Maybe. So we'll have to wait and see whether Fernando ever makes the transition. Obviously, Filippi Massa is the latest one that has made the transition. We've got plenty of ex-F1 already in Formula E, and we'll see how he does. I personally think that it might be a difficult transition for Filippi, but time will tell.
And I'd recommend everybody who's following along to support Sam for the fan boost, because he could probably do with the extra kilojoules at some point in the next couple of races. So you feel that you're in the same as the last couple of years, where you had a slim chance that you could be at the champion at the end?
The previous years, it was literally a mathematical chance. This year, we have a genuine chance. The last couple of years, the first year I came 5th, second year I came 4th, last year I just missed out on 3rd again, I came 4th again. This year I'm in 2nd. I can only now finish 1st, 2nd and 3rd in the championship. Mathematically, I can't do any worse. So, it's been a stellar season, but we want to go one more.
Well, thank you both, Sam and Sylvain. It's been fabulous just having you here and having this conversation. We will be back with more coffee talks after the general session, but the general session will be on from 2 o'clock today. And of course, we're back tomorrow with more coffee talk and some V Brown Bag Tech Talks. We'll talk to you all later.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.